Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Guru Manthan series. Uh, as you know, Guru Manthan is being organized by the Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development. Our mission is to develop human and social capital to build a resurgent India. So we work with four sectors: the government, NGOs, corporates, and the community. One of our target audience is the teacher community, for whom we have this Guru Manthan series. It's a series of 50 lectures by thinkers and educationists, a platform for teachers to basically discuss, debate, and learn from about diverse perspectives and practices. Starting on August 1st, we have had 19 lectures so far. Today is the 20th one in the series. So we had Professor M.K. Sridhar from the NEP Drafting Committee. Then we had former Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy, Anurag Beher from Azim Premji Foundation. Then we had Dr. Kasturi Rangan, Mr. Anil Swarup, the former MHRD Secretary. We had Professor Annamalai talk about language, and we had Professor T.V. Kattimani, and last week we had Swami Mahipalananda talk about universal values. So today we have a very interesting guest to address us all, Mr. Sahil Agarwal. Sahil is a educationist, an engineer by qualification, then studied diplomacy in the Jindal Global University. He has co-founded the Rishihood University and the Rastram School of Public Leadership. Welcome to Sahil on behalf of everyone here in the audience. And as always, we will have a 20 to 25-minute lecture by the speaker. And then we will have a moderated Q&A session for about 30 minutes. And then we'll move to the closing remarks. Over to you, Sahil, and welcome to the platform.
Thank you so much, Praveenji. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was great to see the kind of people who have spoken at this platform. And those are people I take inspiration from. So thanks for inviting me. And Dr. Balu has been an important part in my journey. He's shaped a lot of what I'm doing now. So it's really an honor to be here meeting everyone. Thank you so much for that. So the topic that you've given is very interesting on starting an impact university, why and how, because thinking about this topic also gave me a lot of reflections, a moment to take a pause and understand what we have been doing, why we have been doing it. So thanks for that. I'll share these two parts of uh, why I decided or I ended up doing this kind of a work, and how we are able to do. So I'll divide the why in three broad parts. So when I was in college, that was when I started my mental map started to shape up on the issues of what I want to do in life. And those were 2010 to 2014 when I was in college in at IIT Delhi, and very interesting times in the Indian history, because we saw that Anna Hazare movement was on the rise, and there was Arvind Kejriwal, then Narendra Modi announced his national elections. So a lot of this thing was happening in India, and as a young student, it was a very exciting time for me. And not just for me, but we saw that a lot of people around me, particularly of our generation, uh, this entire thing fascinated us. And so many of us were wondering how can we jump into this and do something like this as a career, because this notion of taking up alternate careers, that was on the rise. uh, it was January 2012, Vivekanand's birthday, the National Youth Day, when we had requested Dr. Balu to come to our campus to deliver a workshop for us on leadership. That was the first time I got an opportunity to meet him, and the kind of response that workshop received, the kind of the number of students who came to that workshop, the way they liked that workshop, that was one of the testimony that things have changed now. Youth are really interested in doing something like this. So there was this macro level change happening in India, uh, which is not just about our demographic dividend, and it is not just about our the maturity of our democracy. It is not just about how India is developing. I think a civilizational kind of a reawakening is happening, where people are really taking pride in what we were, as a 5,000-year-old history, where we are and where we can go. So this entire possibility fascinated me a lot. The second part of uh, my journey was these reflections on what are the best ways to be able to contribute. So when we started, of course, I didn't know that institution building is a subject, let alone leadership or policy or governance or any of the things that we associate ourselves with us now. At that time, I was just a student wanting to make a change. So this thing about how we can contribute to nation building, when we see that India's moment has sort of arrived. There is a chance for us to contribute to India. Uh, in my personal abilities or personal reflections, I realized that institutional kind of work appeals to me the most. So that was the motivation behind exploring this as a career. So what I mean by institutions is that there is a lot of good work happening in terms of social movements, in terms of activism, even in terms of business, in terms of civil society. So these are great ways to contribute to a nation. Uh, where I thought I could contribute is that if we can institutionalize some of this, then we can provide sustained long-term platforms, not just for our youth, but also to this entire, to people who have an intellectual bent of mind, to people who have some ideas on research and who want to contribute uh, to making a social impact, to people who want to support a nation's development but don't want to do simple charity. So these were some thoughts that came to us. We saw that there is a young population who is ready to contribute to something, but can we give them a structured platform? So these were this was the second most important factor which led to the why of setting up an impact university. And the third was personal interests or experiences and a family background. So my father had set up an educational institution around 15 years ago. So while I was growing up, I was seeing this. So it was a part of my my growing up, that I could see how educational institutions are being set up, what kind of impact they are able to create, what are the challenges in the space of education. So all this was happening, and as a young person, it had a lot of impact on me. So these three factors of what is happening in India, what are the kind of institutions we need, and my personal individual journey, these were I would say this was the backdrop in which uh, the work that I'm involved with started to happen. Uh, Now the how of it. So I wouldn't say that we have figured out the how. I mean, we are a very new institution, and my personal career has only been 6 years. So I'm still learning a lot, and of course learning from the work that Dr. Balu and people like him have done. What are our I can share what is our approach. I don't know whether that approach will lead us to our objectives, but how we ended up doing this is that when we started, we absolutely had no clue that we will be doing this. We wanted to do something good in education. That was the simple starting point. We didn't know that it will be an impact university. We didn't know what will be the name. We didn't know what will be the location, what kind of programs we will do, what kind of impact we will be able to create. All that was question mark, and that was not even the main requirement for us to understand. Our main objective was that let's get the basics sorted out, and then we will see rest of the things. My personal maturity also had not reached that level that I could think of what is social impact and how we lead to social impact. So when we started thinking this, As we moved ahead in our journey, then these questions came to us that, what will be the vision of the university? How is it going to be a different university? So like you, I'm also deeply fascinated and inspired by the works of Swami Vivekanand. I can see his photo, behind Dr. Balu on the wall. So I was reading his complete works, and that is where we saw this. I read this word, rishihood. That was the first time I came across this term of rishihood, and the way he had explained it, that this is the human ideal. All of us have to aspire to reach the state of being a rishi, which he described as rishihood. And that was 2015, and we were trying to think what should be the name of our institution. And when I read it, I thought, no, this is the name. So this is the highest ideal that has been given to us, and this should be the ideal of this should be the mission in front of us as a university. So then this entire concept of spiritually grounded, socially impactful education started to take shape in our minds. Uh, and and it, uh, it was, of course, a very not tough, but a very back and forth kind of a brainstorming kind of a journey, because not everyone has the same background, not everyone has the same understanding. There are different ways to approach the same thing. So uh, fortunately, all of us aligned on this idea that the concept of rishihood, the state of being a rishi, can be the foundational philosophy to inspire people to make a social impact, and to institutionalize this in the form of an impact university. So that happened, and since then it is more of how do we go about actually doing it. So in a university, there are few uh, building blocks. So the most important is the kind of ecosystem that the university has built, or any institution tries to build. So the ecosystem consists of what will be the kind of courses that are going to be there, because the courses decide the kind of people that are going to be there. What is the kind of research work that we intend to do? What are the kind of students we want to bring in? What are the kind of partnerships we want to do? Because the faculty and the students will end up working on those partnerships. So we thought that rather than focusing on some specific subject areas, let us focus on building an ecosystem which can bring different areas together to create a social impact. And I'll share some examples of what we have done till now. So we thought that let's identify some areas which are of very direct social relevance, particularly from India's point of view, and generally also. So healthcare, education, entrepreneurship, creativity, leadership, these naturally came to us as areas which have a direct impact on the society. And since there was a potential of converting these areas into academic disciplines, we chose them as schools. And then the rest of the curriculum, in terms of undergraduate programs, postgraduate programs, it started to develop on those lines. So one of the things that we have done, and the new education policy facilitates that even more, is interdisciplinary intertwining of these disciplines. So when a student comes to us and studies entrepreneurship, they're not just studying entrepreneurship, but they're also getting a good exposure to the area of healthcare, the area of education and psychology, the area of design and arts. So that helps the student gets a lot of exposure. The student is able to, so for example, if a student is wanting to build a business as a student of entrepreneurship, they will naturally think about that, what is the sector in which they want to build a business. And if they get an exposure that there are these sectors, and there is this way of creating a social impact, then automatically their brain starts working in that direction, that yes, through my business I can make this kind of an impact. So I choose this kind of a sector to open a business. So that's one way in which we foresee our graduates working. I'll give an example of, so we are very new. In fact, our first batch will come to campus next year. So we've not kind of that way formally launched yet. So we did some small projects in the meanwhile. One of them, we recently did a project for Ajanta Ellora caves. So their art on the walls, it's a 2000-year-old art, and it's starting to fade away because of the weather and the time. There is a need for us to restore, preserve, and recreate that art. Some of it has already faded away, but it tells us a lot about that period of history, because it's one of the most important sites for Buddhist art. So what we did was, we did a project in which we used artificial intelligence and image processing technology. So we created a hackathon in which we invited technology students to come and to create AI solutions, so that they can we can take a photo of any fading art and try to restore it. So similar efforts have been going on. Even companies like Google are trying to create something like this. But why we chose to do it, because this will not only encourage students to apply technology to something like this. Also, it will generally raise the awareness about the importance of preserving our heritage. So that's the kind of projects that we want to do. Fortunately, recently in the last Mann Ki Baat episode by Prime Minister Modi, this the effort on Ajanta was he mentioned that in the Mann Ki Baat speech. Of course, we played a very small role in it, but that's one example of how we intend to build an impact university. Just a few days ago, we concluded a workshop for a tribe in Nigeria, and you have been working so closely with tribals in India. So fascinatingly, there is a group of people in Nigeria who are Nigerian origins. They are like African ethnicity, but somehow they got very interested in Indian art, popular culture. So they would watch Bollywood movies, they would learn Hindi, they would, from those movies, they would listen to Indian radio and the Indian songs, and they would do some skits and plays within their tribal community. So somehow we got in touch with them. Someone introduced us to this interesting community, and they said that, can you teach us Indian art? And it's their Hindi is not a working Hindi. It's very rudimentary kind of Hindi. They just know Hindi as we would know French. But because there was this interest and they wanted to learn more about India, we organized a series of workshops for them where they could understand Indian handicrafts, Indian textiles, Indian pottery, etc., so on and so forth. So this is another example of how we grab any opportunity, small or big, to be able to make a social impact. Uh, uh, yeah, so the next thing then comes is that these projects are there, this curriculum is there. The most important factor to do this in the long run becomes how aligned is our team on this. As an institution, there's this thing about institutions that uh, people are not just the product of institutions, but also the resources. Our input is people, are processing, the machinery is people, and our output is also people. So the more aligned people are on this idea of social impact, the better it is. So it's going to be a very long term thing, but the approach is that from the beginning we want to build an impact culture. If we see that even before starting our degree programs, we started engaging ourselves and spending our time and money on such projects, because we want to institutionalize this culture. Social impact should not only become a slogan for us, but it should become the living reality. And it's not an easy thing, because not even personally for me, and not for anyone else in the team. It is it's a process, it's in the making. So the more we do it, the more we get inspired, the more we learn from it, and the more we continue to do it. So that has been another important factor in our journey, that how much can we align our people, our faculty members, our students, our founders, our advisors, our mentors, our industry partners, on this idea of social impact. I'm generally someone who can't speak much, but if there are some questions, then it becomes easier for me to run my own mind. These were some of the introductory thoughts that I wanted to share from our journey on why and how of building an impact institution. I would be very happy to listen to what others have to say and their questions.
Thank you, Sai. I'll just maybe start off with a couple of questions, and while you're answering, we'll wait for the other questions to come in. One was, as I had mentioned earlier, many of the teachers in the audience here work in schools. And there are two questions. One was, when we look at schools, even schools are seen as uh, places where impact can happen, right? We say that education can change or liberate communities or societies. So, educational institutions or schools are seen as origins of impact or social change. But if you look at the other phase, the reality today is many times we kind of drop it down to mere curricular transaction or syllabus completion and reduce it to report cards. So, any thoughts on how do we keep that philosophy intact in everything that we do day in, day out?
That's a very, very important question, Praveenji, and that has been a question that not just school education, but I think all the institutions have been struggling with. That how can we, make education non-transactional and actually make it purposeful. Since many people from school education community are on this session. Uh, our approach at Rishihood and also at Rashtraam has been that when we design the curriculum, we start with why. There is this famous talk by Simon Sinek on starting with why. I think when we start by identifying the purpose of education, of what we are delivering, and not just the philosophical purpose of education, but the purpose of actually what we are going to teach in the class. I think as educators, we need to start from there. And of course, there are some challenges in the system overall. NEP is trying to resolve many of them. That there is a standardized curriculum, that we are not able to understand what are the personal needs of a learner and then customize our curriculum based on that. We are bounded by some standards and frameworks. I think having all that, still there is sufficient freedom for us to think of what we actually bring to the classroom. So sometimes I also take lectures and classes for our visiting students. uh, my I try that as much as the kind of examples that we bring in, the kind of frameworks that we bring in, the more they can relate to social impact. I think it provides more and more inspiration to the student. So even if we are trying to teach something like productivity at workplace, if we try not only to cover the technical sides of it, the managerial sides of it, but also the purpose of it, then I think the students are naturally interested in learning that. So for school children, if we, rather than teaching maths, if we start with a problem, a very direct social problem in their life, then I think they will be naturally inclined to spend time in learning. So I would say that purpose gives us a liking for learning, and then once we have developed that liking, then rest of the things automatically follow. So whether it is school education or higher education, we should always start with the purpose of why we are taking that class.
Thank you, Zach. We have a question from Radhika, uh, and I'll just kind of slightly expand that question. You did mention about problem solving and taking on projects being a culture, being institutionalized in your university. Now, it's also a reality that many times institutions, especially educational institutions, are person driven. Schools, the way they run in the presence or absence of a principal, you can see a stark difference. So, how do we bring in that culture, or how do we institutionalize that culture or thinking? If you have done some work on that, can you elaborate a bit?
So the that's a critical. It's like a make or break factor in any institution's journey. And when I was mentioning earlier on the how part of it, of building a university, creating this culture. every institution may have different culture. Some may have an innovation culture, some may have a research culture. We have an impact culture. I mean, we are trying to build an impact culture. So it takes a lot of time. And I think sometimes why it does not get developed in institutions is that because institutions do not give that time for that culture to mature. So in order for that culture to mature, there is some stability that is required in the leadership, whether it is the principal or the founders of that school. So unfortunately, what has happened in the education sector, especially in the schools, is uh, there is most of the schools start with a kind of a limited and a short-term objective that we have to achieve these many numbers, and once the school reaches, let's say, 1,000 number of students, it will continue to run in perpetuity. It will be financially sustainable. The role of teachers is not ideally it should be the most important, but somehow it takes a backseat, and the infrastructure, the board, the extracurricular activities, all these things, what we showcase in the marketing, they take precedence. So in that process, what happens is that the importance of the people who are actually running that curriculum, developing that curriculum, delivering that curriculum, including the principal and even the founders, that gets reduced. It not just gets reduced, there is a high attrition. I don't know why there should be that kind of an attrition in something like education. So if we see universities, we see that professors mostly continue to be associated with higher educational institutions for a long time. In the West, it's very common to see people starting at an institution and retiring from there. Even in India, 10, 15 years is common. In government institutions, people generally be there for their entire career. But somehow in school education, I don't know what the exact data is. In my personal experiences, I found that 1 year, 2 years, that's how quickly people are changing from one institution to other. When that happens, of course, we cannot have a culture. Uh, it's what is possible is that we give 50 years to build a culture, and then if people start changing, then of course the culture still remains. But when the school is getting built, even in those first 5 years, if there is such a high level of change in leadership, it's very difficult to make a culture. So if you are in a leadership position, I would encourage you to figure out ways where you can be long term associated with your institution.
Next question from Dr. Balu. It has two parts in the question. Sir, you want to ask?
I will let you to ask the question.
Okay. So there were two parts of the question. One was, when the focus or the entire discussion about careers is kind of based on employability. Any course being good or bad, is the metric is employability. Can you really use impact as a metric, or have you factored the employability part into defining your courses? That was the first one. And the second part of the question is, uh, NEP also talks about creating good citizenry for the country. So should we start with talking about impact on the person first, and then impact on the society?
Thanks for those questions. I think Dr. Balu is, he can answer them better than me. But since he has asked those questions, so this is a tussle that keeps going on in our mind, that what is the balance between impact and employability. Fortunately, we see bright spots, and we feel that these two goals may not be as contradictory as we had thought them to be. Fortunately, there is a growing acknowledgement that unless a career is fulfilling for someone, a person may not be able to continue that for long, or may not be able to perform their best to their best potential in that career. So whether whether it is for a, a marketing gimmick, or the companies actually mean it, there is an acknowledgement that corporates have to also move towards understanding what impact they're making. We see that in a lot of corporate literature that comes out now, in terms of advertisements, there is a dimension of social impact there. So I hope that in the times to come, that acknowledgement will also move to some action. But I think at least the young population has started to question this put this question to themselves कि मैं जो भी career ले रहा हूँ, whatever career I am choosing, what is going to be the result, the ultimate impact of that career. So that's a very positive churn that has happened. And I think people will be able to make a marriage between these two things of their employability and impact. And in fact, if you look at the previous discussion on purpose, once we have understood the purpose of whatever career we are choosing, so if for example, if you've chosen to become an engineer, and we see that there is a social purpose to my being an engineer, I am propelled to excel in it. So that's the kind of mindset we want to develop among students. uh, Dr. Balu is absolutely right that before making any kind of impact, the process has to start with me as an individual. So Swami Vivekananda, when he says rishihood, he means our being a rishi. He does not mean to make others a rishi, right? So it's always the ultimate work that we can do is only on ourselves. No, rest is only an expression, or rest is only an excuse to make that happen. So if we have a spiritual initiation, we will know that the only true change we can bring is on ourselves. Rest is only a manifestation of it. So I think educational institutions can play a very, very important role in this, and to help the students understand their own spiritual nature, and to generate their own spiritual process of inquiry, so that first they build themselves, and then they also contribute to the rest of the society.
Thank you, Sahil. There's another question from Ms. Radha. Her question is, how can teachers at the school level inspire high school students to take up such diverse courses that you offer? Are you considering internships or summer camps? And if I may just add to her question, the courses you offer might also be considered as outliers, in the vast plethora of options available. So how do you make the options that you offer be seen as better than the others?
So we definitely understand and acknowledge that the kind of careers we have, they are not for everyone. I mean, if all the students start choosing these kinds of careers, then we'll have a big problem in the society. There is a deep requirement of the regular careers that we see in terms of engineering, law, medical. All these are very important careers. So there is currently an excess of them. That's why there is this problem. But if everyone goes away from them, there may be an even bigger problem. So our careers will remain for a very smaller number of people. We acknowledge that, and therefore we may not grow into a university which has thousands and thousands of students. How we want to expose the students to such choices, alternate careers, or outlying careers, we try different mechanisms. One of the things that we experimented with is called a gap year. So gap year, we typically hear into two scenarios. One is when in India, people, for preparing for their competitive exams like medical or engineering entrance exams, they take a gap year because it was difficult to crack it in the first attempt. That's one kind of a gap year. The second gap year, which is more popular in the West, is people typically take a year off after high school to travel, to do some internships, to save some money from some jobs, to explore different careers in life. That's the kind of gap year that we've tried to bring to India. That can we give a structured, mentored 1 year time for a student to explore their own interest. So of course the concept is new, and it will take time for people to actually take this as a choice, because there is a feeling that 1 year they should not waste. So that's one way of exposing the students in high school to different careers. The second way that the schools should do, and I think a lot of schools have started doing it, is inviting people from different careers and inviting different universities who are offering this kind of new courses to come and interact with their students, because the students and the parents, they mostly go with the flow, right? They have to their decisions are based on what others are doing, and since the choices are limited, most of the people end up taking the same decisions. So without even realizing what is my own interest, or what is my my children's my child's interest, we force the child into some kind of a career. So that can be prevented if we provide a much larger plate of choices to our students. The third very long-term systemic change that is required is from going away from these disciplines of non-med, med, arts, commerce, to a more choice-based integrated kind of a curriculum. The new education policy has proposed that change, and if we are able to implement it, it's going to be a major reform, because then the students will be choosing their choice course subjects. They won't only choose their stream, but they will be choosing that I want to study history, maths, and law in high school. So I'm waiting that someday we can reach that stage, so that the students can get a much better idea of what career they want to choose.
Thank you. One more question we have here. Like, what transactional methodologies do you plan to deploy when your focus is actually abstract and not the standard measurable indicator for a university?
What methodologies?
What transactional methodologies would you deploy when your focus is kind of abstract and not the standard measurable indicators of a regular university might not work in your scenario?
So I didn't understand the term transactional methodology. If the person who's asked this question, they can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think he's referring to the curricular transaction, the classroom.
So the delivery, the pedagogy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So great question. This came up when Praveenji was commenting on one of the questions. The most direct pedagogy to do this is project based. So if you are teaching a student psychology, so one way is to teach psychology through lectures and through books. Of course, that is important, because till time we have some sort of understanding, we can't go directly into projects. But once that has happened, or basic understanding has developed, to take them to the next level of understanding, what we do is first we give them the projects. Through the projects, they develop an interest. They not just apply what they've learned to that project, because their current level of understanding is very low, but they start developing an interest. This question comes to their mind, that what next? No, I know this much, but I can't solve this problem by knowing this much. I have to know more. So that's the advantage of project-based learning. We have also placed a good amount of emphasis on peer learning. So that is another dimension that is sort of lacking in our educational system, because we learn a lot from our friends. And actually, informally, when I reflect on my hostel days, I would rely on my friends when I didn't understand what the professor has said. So why don't we make it into a formal actual process, where students can spend a lot of time with each other, and they can not only do projects, but also ideate, explain things to each other. And fortunately, in our type of courses that we have, there is no right or wrong. I mean, these are not objective domains. These are subjective areas where we get more ideas by discussing our ideas, and we try to achieve at something, rather than having the need of proving something right or wrong. So project-based learning, peer learning, uh, travel-based learning, that's something that has been our experience at Vision India Foundation. We do some programs which are travel based, and the kind of learnings that we have when we actually meet people who have done something, when we go to the grassroots, when we spend time in those villages, in those slums, that puts a deep impression on our minds. So that is another way to teach such courses.
As an add-on, I think why converting this thought process into a reality in the classroom takes quite an effort, and you need the right set of teachers or facilitators for that. And NEP also emphasizes that they emphasize the role of teachers throughout, from school education to all the way to higher education. It talks about getting better teachers. So any thing that you have done to so that you recruit well, or you train your teachers, get them ready for that. Any thoughts on that?
Right. So one thing that we have done is that most of our recruitments uh, have been very reference based and direct. I mean, we've not invited hundreds of CVs, and then we have not gone through the standard interview process. We've actually we've mostly, what we do is we try to find the person who is doing the kind of thing that we want to do, or the kind of skills, the kind of aptitude, the kind of mindset we want, and then we find out ways to bring that person to us. So it's like poaching that we often do rather than waiting for people to apply to our institutions. What that has meant is that our recruitment has often been very slow. I mean, it has taken us uh, 5 to 6 months easily to have to begin a conversation with someone, and to for that person to actually come to our place. It has worked for us till now because we are a very small team. I mean, currently what we have done is we only have a limited set of deans and faculty members, so it has not been a problem till now. I think it will become a problem as we have to build a much bigger team of faculty members. But by that time, what would have happened is that this team of founding faculty would be accustomed to this culture, the kind of mindset that we want them to have. So it will automatically start spreading across the university.
Another, one of the exercises that all of us are part of is we do read about success stories from across the world. We do read about models which are failed in different parts of the world. And when we try to, I mean, and most of the times when we try to replicate successes, they are not so great here. Because then we have to contextualize those inputs as well. So, have you come across any other impact universities across the world? Any things which you could pick up from there, and what you think might work in your case?
Right. So as a person, I like to read a lot, and I've read the institution building stories of some good institutions within India, outside India. Uh, at our Rashtam School of Public Leadership, we have interacted and even collaborated with some of such institutions which have brought very deep impact. So one example is the Matsushita Institute of Government and Management in Japan. A few months ago, we collaborated with them. It was started by the founder of Panasonic, Mr. Matsushita. So at the time of his around his retirement and closer to his death, he contributed a significant portion of his wealth to set up this institution. And that institution has produced right from their mayors to their former prime minister have been their alumni. Including top corporate leaders of the biggest companies of Japan. So that is one example that we study. Going back into the history, Sciences Po in Paris tried to do something similar when France lost the war with Prussia. Some of the people in the French community, business and political community, they came together to set up an institution. We also go back in our own history and look at how Takshashila worked, and we try to read whatever references are available currently. Not much is available, but that's a very strong inspiration for us, because Chanakya actually was able to do it. He was able to save and build a country through a university. So that's kind of the epitome of what kind of impact a university can bring.
A couple of questions have come in based on on the word impact. So 10 years later, if you look back, how would you measure impact, or how would you quantify, or what would be the measure of your success?
So a disclaimer here is that most likely what we'll say now is going to change, because our what we say currently or aspire currently to achieve is based on our current level of understanding and maturity. And we have to give ourselves the space that this will evolve. So the answers may change. What we started is we developed a plan for 100 years. So we thought, what are we going to do in 21st century? What should be the achievement that Rishi Hood should have had in the year 2100? So the answer was that Rishi Hood, the state of being a Rishi, that should become a macro aspiration. So currently, if our aspiration is GDP, our aspiration is HDI index, can we aspire that in 2100 populations across the globe, their aspiration, the public aspiration will be to self-actualize, to achieve Rishi Hood. And then we go backwards, that if that has to happen, then maybe 20 years before, all the institutions across the world have to have this kind of philosophy. So this has to become a part of the education system. And if that has to happen, then our university has to become a global benchmark in education. If that has to happen, we have to first become a nationally important institution. If that has to happen, then we have to demonstrate through our alumni that this is the kind of impact and career we are able to build. And if that has to happen, then our own learning models have to be very robust and in place. So that is how we've gone 10 years to 10 years to 10 years. And we thought that by the end of this century, can we create that macro impact? So that's our approach. But I think a lot of this will evolve and change as we move ahead.
Yeah, as you were as you were responding, there was a quick comment wherein the IITs and IISc started for this purpose. And so, any quick comment? How do you think your journey would be different from what they have accomplished?
Okay, so I think the context in which these institutions started was very different to the context that is now. And I'm talking of not context of our lives, but the context of where our civilization stands. When IITs started, we were a beaten civilization. I mean, we had just come out of our 1,000 years of colonization. We didn't have money, we didn't have ideas, we didn't have we didn't have anything. I mean, we were just trying to stand up. And where we are now, I think it's a totally different situation. And I feel very fortunate to be living in these times, because if I was born 20 years earlier than I was born, then I don't think I would have been able to do even 1% of what we are doing right now. So it's a matter of context. I think what IITs and IIMs and those national institutions of eminence achieved, that is highly commendable from the context in which they started, because they really provided the kind of technical advantage, the kind of people that India needed, and not just India but the world needed. We have seen examples of how those graduates have gone all over the world, and they are leading top companies now. So that was there. What we think lagged was that this spirit of being a beaten civilization that started reflecting in our institutional culture. We, rather than looking at India from a sense of pride, we started looking at India from a critical lens, and that seeped into our curriculum. In higher education, in social sciences, in humanities, in the school curriculum, we started looking at ourselves as a poor, downtrodden civilization. And because of that, we lost some generations who couldn't be as proud of themselves as they could have been. So that was, I think, one of the major disadvantage which we don't have now. So I think there is a big responsibility on our shoulders as educators, that can we ensure that all the generations that are coming out in the future are going to be very proud of themselves.
Yeah. One last question before we move into your closing remarks. A question which I get asked a lot of times, but I don't get to ask. Why this line of work after IITs?
So my personal I've been very fortunate in my life. So at the age of 22, when I graduated from IIT, uh, I fortunately came from a family where it was a business family, and we had sufficient resources. So even if I didn't work for rest of my life, my life would have been spent well. Uh, so at the age of 22, I had a financial cushion for rest of my life. I had a good education, what of us would aspire to achieve. I had a great set of mentors, including Dr. Balu here. So people like them, people like him actually made me realize, and they provided that inspiration that don't just look at your life as your own life, but what can we do in the larger scheme of things. I had got a very good set of friends. So I mean, my whatever was humanly possible for me to achieve, I had received that at the age of 22. So I thought that what else can I do now? So the rest of the life then becomes just a matter of self-exploration. So I think it's a result of uh, extreme fortune that I received. So I wouldn't say that I had planned it to be this way, or no, I had put a lot of hard efforts to do what I want to do. It's just what I'm getting, and I'm just going through this.
Thank you, Sahil, for the very engaging question answer session. A couple of quick closing remarks from your side, and then we'll move to remarks from Dr. Balu.
Okay, so now, I'll try to summarize. So those were some very good questions, and this entire session was more of a reflection for me rather than sharing my experiences. If I have to summarize some of the key takeaways that I would have from this session, is the most important would be that India is at a point in history where it's kind of a crossroads. If we don't step up now, I think we would have lost a very important moment in our history. I think it has come to us after more than 1,000 years. So our role as educators becomes all the more important, because we are not just uh, looking for an incremental change, that last generation could have achieved this generation could achieve this, and then next generation could achieve this. We are not on that kind of a development journey. We are at a transformational journey here. So what we do now will decide whether India is at a path of civilizational reawakening, or is it going to be a one more country which is aspiring to reach development. uh, so once we have understood once we have internalized this importance of being in the space of education, I think collectively all of us can make those efforts. Uh, New education policy, if some of us have not read, then I would encourage that all of us should read it, because that has really changed the baseline that we used to think of educational reforms. So now that is our starting point, and we have to build on that. We will have to develop a coherent vision. All of us will have to really ideate and take this as a common mission. Educational institutions are not should not be competing with each other. We are in a zone where we still need many more institutions. So there is no competition, but all of us need to align on this vision that education and educational institutions can directly contribute to nation building. Yeah, those would be some of my closing remarks.
Thank you. Over to Dr. Balu.
I'm still thinking what to say. I was enjoying the session so much, and I've always seen Sahil from a different space. To see him from this wonderful space where the clarity of thought, the conviction in what he's part of, and the journey that he has taken till now, and the journey he plans to take, is very inspiring. For somebody who any this must be, it's not a cliche for any teacher or a professor anywhere in the world, or a mentor, to see somebody whom he thinks is really going to outdo people. It's a different feeling. So here I was watching two people, young people whom I admire, both with two different kinds of dreams. Sahil with the dream of Orishavood University, and Praveen, who's conspiring to create the Center for Human Excellence. So, two seamless, it seemed to be seamlessly meshed together. So it was watching the two converse. I would confess that it made my heart beat with joy. I agree that India is going through, it's at a milestone which is going to be transformational. It's transformational just because of young people like you. It's not transformational because by accident. I think it's a product of the times. So it's wonderful to see that we are all exploring these very difficult questions. In fact, if somebody were to ask me what is an impact university, it's so difficult to define an abstraction and reducing it to a workable entity. So I've been listening to the story of Sahil from several years, and whenever he shared this dream with me, I thought another young man dreaming, let him set it up, he'll know. But then every step, every day is bringing such wonderful progress, and I always stay connected through his social media posts, other things. I think this is something which can be done, and I hope more people will imitate it, more people will copy it. This idea should spread like wildfire. And higher education should change from the customary way we know it to something which is going to not just transform India. I think beyond that, the true spirit of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and playing the Jagat Guru's role that all of us dream about for India, whole of humanity, the whole of this world will come to terms with concepts like global citizenship, ideas which will emerge from such institutions like Rishi Wood or the Center for Human Excellence that Praveen is talking about. And I think we will are in for very good times. My only hope is that I'm alive long enough to enjoy the benefits of seeing all that play out for this country and for the world itself. So thank you, Sahil. It was such a wonderful time listening to you. And I'm sure that more and more strength to you, and we will see more of this. So we will definitely closely watch Rishi Wood for two reasons. Like you already have said this, that is a word very, very close to Swami Vivekananda's heart. And it's not just a word. I think it's a whole meaning to a way a particular person can evolve. So there's a whole story behind that word. And I hope that story becomes part of the DNA of Rishi Wood University, and you will make us all proud. Thank you so much, and thank you for this wonderful session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Balu. You've always been inspiring, and my hope would be that what you did in my life, I can be able to do in someone else's life. So that would be my prayer.
That's how it goes. Praveen, it's up to you.
Thank you, Sahil, and thank you, Dr. Balu, for the wonderful closing remarks. So do join in next week. We will have Mr. H.M. Prashant, who was in the audience today, talk about teachers and technology. One of the topics I think which has been very hotly debated over the last few months. He comes from a educational technology company and brings in very different perspectives. Then the week after that, we will have Professor D.P. Giridhar, another very interesting personality who was there in the audience again today, who has set up a university himself. And he will share about how do we define learning outcomes. And this is one area which many of us as teachers do falter. So how do we start off on those crucial first steps? So look forward to hearing inputs, your feedback from all of you here, and have a great weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Sahil. See you sometime later.
It was really an honor. Thank you.
Thanks.